I was staring at the cease and desist letter in disbelief when my phone rang for the third time that morning. The header read, Pinewood Heights Homeowners Association, in aggressive bold letters, and the signature at the bottom belonged to one Patricia Hendricks, HOA president. According to this legal adjacent document, I had exactly 72 hours to remove all unauthorized commercial signage from my properties, or face fines of $500 per day per sign. The problem: the buildings in question were mine. Fully owned, paid off, investment properties that I had purchased 3 years ago in Tampa, Florida. And the signs they wanted gone were simple property management placards displaying my company name, Valdez Property Solutions, along with a phone number for maintenance requests. I answered the phone, already knowing who it would be. Mr. Valdez, this is Patricia Hendricks from the HOA. I trust you received our letter. Her voice had that particular quality of someone who enjoyed wielding small amounts of power over others. I did, Mrs. Hendricks. And I have to say, I'm confused. These are my buildings. I own them outright. They're commercial rental properties. The properties are within HOA boundaries, Mr. Valdez. All external signage must comply with our aesthetic guidelines. Your signs are garish, oversized, and frankly, they lower property values for the rest of us. I walked to my window and looked at the nearest building, a well-maintained 4-unit apartment complex I had bought as my first major investment. The sign was maybe 2 feet by 3 feet, professionally printed, mounted discreetly near the entrance. Garish wasn't a word anyone reasonable would use. Mrs. Hendricks, my buildings aren't part of your HOA. They're commercial properties. I never signed any covenant agreements. The previous owner was part of the HOA, Mr. Valdez. Those obligations transfer with the property. That's not how it works. I had a lawyer review everything before I bought. These properties were specifically excluded from HOA jurisdiction because they're income properties, not residential homes. There was a pause, and I could practically hear her jaw tightening. We'll see what our attorney has to say about that. The signs come down or the fines start Monday. She hung up before I could respond. I sat down at my desk and pulled up the purchase documents for all 3 buildings I owned in the Pinewood Heights area. 2 4-unit complexes and 1 6-unit building, all bought between 2021 and 2023. Each purchase had been carefully structured specifically because I knew the neighborhood had an active HOA, and I wanted no part of their jurisdiction over my business properties. My phone buzzed with a text from my property manager, Derek. Tenants in Building C are asking about the letter taped to the front door. What's going on? I drove over immediately. Sure enough, someone had taped a copy of the cease and desist to the front entrance of my 6-unit building, right next to my property management sign. I tore it down, furious. This wasn't just about signs anymore. They were trying to intimidate my tenants. Mrs. Chen, one of my longest-term renters, was getting her mail when I arrived. She was in her 70s, a retired teacher who had lived in my building for 2 years. Isaac, what's this about signs? That woman came by yesterday taking pictures. What woman? Blonde, middle-aged, driving a white Mercedes SUV. She was very rude when I asked what she was doing. Said she was documenting violations. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my anger in check. Mrs. Chen, don't worry about it. It's a misunderstanding with the HOA. Everything's going to be fine. But I wasn't sure it would be. I had dealt with difficult people before in business, but something about Patricia Hendricks's tone suggested this was personal for her. I just couldn't figure out why. Back in my office, I called my real estate attorney, Marcus Webb. He had handled all my property purchases and knew the situation. Isaac, I remember this specifically. Marcus said after I explained the situation. We made sure those properties were carved out. They're zoned commercial residential, they're income producing, and the previous owner had already established they weren't subject to HOA rules. You have nothing to worry about legally. So what do I do? Ignore them. Keep your signs up. If they try to fine you, we'll fight it. But honestly, I don't think it'll get that far. Once they realize you're serious, they'll back off. I wasn't so sure. Marcus didn't know Patricia Hendricks. That weekend, I was doing a routine inspection of Building A when I noticed something odd. Someone had spray painted a small red X on my property management sign. Not huge, but deliberate. Vandalism. I took photos and filed a police report. The officer who took my statement was sympathetic but not optimistic. Property crime like this, unless you have video footage, it's hard to pursue. You might want to install cameras. I have cameras on the buildings for security. I'll check them. The footage was enlightening. At 2:30 in the morning, a figure in dark clothes and a baseball cap had walked up to my sign and marked it with spray paint. The person was careful to avoid the main security cameras, but one angle caught a partial view. The build and gate looked female, and in one frame, as she turned to leave, the streetlight caught her face for just a second. Patricia Hendricks. I sat back in my chair, stunned. The HOA president had personally vandalized my property. This was beyond petty neighborhood disputes. This was criminal. I called Marcus immediately. We need to escalate this. I have her on camera. Don't go to the police yet, Marcus advised. Let's use this as leverage. I'll send a letter to the HOA board and their attorney, making it clear we have evidence of criminal activity and that any further harassment will result in legal action, including criminal complaints. The letter went out Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, my phone was ringing again. This time it wasn't Patricia. It was a man who introduced himself as Robert Chen, the HOA's attorney. Mr. Valdez, I've reviewed your property documents. You're correct that your buildings aren't subject to HOA jurisdiction. I've advised my client to withdraw the cease and desist letter. I apologize for any confusion. What about the vandalism? There was a pause. I'm not aware of any vandalism allegations. Your client spray painted my sign. I have video evidence. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Valdez. If you have evidence of a crime, you should take it to the police. I'm giving your client a chance to make this right before I do that. I want a written apology from the HOA board, acknowledgement that my properties are not subject to HOA rules, and reimbursement for the damaged sign. $200. I'll discuss it with my client. The next day, I received an email from Robert Chen with an attached document. It was a formal letter from the HOA board, signed by all 5 members including Patricia Hendricks, acknowledging that my properties were not within HOA jurisdiction and apologizing for the misunderstanding. There was no mention of the vandalism, but attached was a check for $200 labeled Settlement of Disputed Matters. I should have accepted it and moved on, but something bothered me. Why had Patricia targeted me in the first place? We had never even met before this dispute. I started asking around the neighborhood. It was my tenant in Building B, James, who finally gave me the answer. James was a grad student at the University of South Florida, friendly and observant. "Oh yeah, there's history there," he said when I asked if he knew anything about Patricia Hendricks. "My girlfriend's mom is on the HOA board. Apparently, Mrs. Hendricks's son tried to buy one of your buildings before you did. Got outbid. She was furious because she wanted him living nearby." Suddenly, it all made sense. This wasn't about signs or property values. Patricia Hendricks was vindictive because I had unknowingly beaten her son in a real estate deal 3 years ago. I decided to let it go. I had my written acknowledgement, my money, and my sign stayed up. But Patricia Hendricks apparently wasn't ready to let it go. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the City of Tampa Code Enforcement Office. Someone had filed a complaint about one of my buildings, alleging multiple violations: overgrown vegetation, peeling paint, trash accumulation, and unsafe railings. I drove over to Building C immediately. The property was immaculate. I paid a landscaping company to maintain all my buildings weekly. The paint was fresh from a job I had completed just 6 months ago. There was no trash, and the railings had been inspected and certified by a contractor just last year. The code enforcement officer, a tired-looking man named Gary, seemed embarrassed. "Look, I have to respond to every complaint. I can see this property is well maintained. I'll photograph everything and close the case as unfounded. But between you and me, you might want to check who's filing these complaints. Can you tell me who filed it? Technically, I shouldn't, but since it's clearly frivolous." He checked his tablet. "Patricia Hendricks. Same woman has filed 3 other complaints this week on your properties." This was harassment, plain and simple. I called Marcus again. "We need to pursue a restraining order and file a formal harassment complaint," I told him. "That's going to be expensive and time-consuming, Isaac. Are you sure?" "She's not going to stop, Marcus. She vandalized my property, tried to abuse HOA authority, and now she's filing false complaints with the city." "What's next?" Marcus sighed. "Okay, let me draft something. We'll need documentation of everything." Over the next week, I compiled a detailed timeline. The initial cease and desist letter, the phone calls, the vandalism video, the false code enforcement complaints. I also discovered that Patricia had been posting in a private Facebook group for Pinewood Heights residents, claiming I was a slumlord who was destroying the neighborhood character. Several of my tenants showed me screenshots. None of it was true. I maintained my properties meticulously, charged fair rents, and responded to maintenance requests within 24 hours. My tenant retention rate was over 80%, which was exceptional in the Tampa rental market. Marcus filed for a restraining order on grounds of harassment and filed a civil suit for defamation based on the Facebook posts. We also submitted a formal complaint to the city about the false code enforcement reports. The court date for the restraining order was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, things escalated. I was at Building A late one evening, fixing a leaky faucet for one of my tenants, when I heard glass breaking. I ran outside to find the windshield of my truck shattered. A brick lay on the driver's seat, and spray painted on the side of my truck was "Get out." This time I called the police immediately. 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes and took a report. I showed them the security footage from the building. The video was clear. A white Mercedes SUV had pulled up, a figure got out, threw a brick at my truck, spray painted the message, and drove away. The license plate was partially visible. "That's enough for vandalism and possibly terroristic threats," one officer said. "Do you know who owns this vehicle?" "Patricia Hendricks. She's the president of the local HOA. We have an ongoing legal dispute." The officers exchanged glances. "We'll follow up with her. You'll need to press charges." "I will." They left, and I sat in my damaged truck, hands shaking with anger and adrenaline. This had gone way beyond a property dispute. Patricia Hendricks had committed multiple crimes now, and she was escalating. The next morning, I got a call from Detective Lisa Morrison with the Tampa Police Department. "Mr. Valdez, I'm handling your case. I've reviewed the video evidence you provided. We're going to bring Mrs. Hendricks in for questioning today. I wanted to give you a heads up in case she tries to contact you. Don't respond to any communication from her. Everything goes through your attorney now." "Thank you, Detective." I've also reviewed the previous vandalism report you filed. The video evidence from that incident, combined with this one, establishes a pattern. We're looking at multiple counts of criminal mischief and possibly stalking. Patricia Hendricks was arrested that afternoon. I found out because Derek called me laughing. "Boss, you're not going to believe this. Mrs. Hendricks got arrested. It's all over the neighborhood Facebook groups. Apparently she tried to run when the cops showed up at her door. She ran. Well, she tried to drive away. Got about 2 blocks before they pulled her over. Now she's also got evading arrest added to the charges." I felt a grim satisfaction but also exhaustion. I had never wanted any of this. I just wanted to run my property management business in peace. The court hearing for the restraining order was now moot since Patricia was facing criminal charges, but the civil defamation suit continued. Her attorney reached out to Marcus about a settlement. "She's offering $20,000 to make the civil suit go away," Marcus told me. "And she's agreed to resign from the HOA board. What about the criminal charges? Those proceed regardless. The state's handling that, but this would resolve the civil issues." I thought about it. $20,000 would more than cover my damaged truck, the vandalized sign, my legal fees, and my time. I wanted in writing that she admits the statements she made about me and my properties were false. I'll make sure that's in the settlement. The settlement was finalized a week later. Patricia Hendricks admitted in a signed document that all her statements about my properties being poorly maintained or me being a slumlord were false and defamatory. She agreed to post a retraction in the neighborhood Facebook group. She resigned from the HOA board, and she paid me $20,000. The criminal case took longer. Patricia hired an expensive defense attorney who tried to argue that the vandalism couldn't be definitively proven to be her in the videos. But the evidence was overwhelming. Her face on camera, her vehicle, her motive, the pattern of harassment. In the end, she pleaded guilty to 2 counts of criminal mischief and 1 count of making a false report to a government agency. The judge sentenced her to 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered her to pay restitution for my property damage. She was also required to attend anger management counseling. The day after her sentencing, I was doing a walkthrough of Building B when Mrs. Chen stopped me. "Isaac, I heard about all the trouble. I'm so sorry you had to deal with that horrible woman." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. It's over now. You know, the neighborhood is much better without her stirring up trouble. The new HOA president, Margaret, she's actually reasonable. She even stopped by to apologize on behalf of the board." That was news to me. "Really?" "Yes. She said if you ever have any issues to contact her directly. She wants to make sure relations are good between the HOA and your properties." It was a nice gesture, but I was wary. Still, I appreciated the olive branch. Life slowly returned to normal. My properties continued to do well. I even bought a 4th building in a different neighborhood, learning my lesson about HOA entanglements. Derek continued to manage the day-to-day operations while I focused on growing the business. About 6 months after Patricia's sentencing, I ran into her at a Home Depot. I was picking up supplies for a renovation project when I saw her in the paint aisle. She looked older, tired. Our eyes met, and for a moment I thought she might say something, but she just turned and walked away quickly. I didn't follow. There was nothing to say. She had made her choices and paid the consequences. Later that evening, I got an unexpected email. It was from Patricia's son, David Hendricks. The subject line read, "An overdue apology." "Mr. Valdez," the email began, "you don't know me, but I'm Patricia Hendricks's son. I recently learned the full extent of what my mother did to you and your business. I'm writing to apologize. though I know I bear no direct responsibility for her actions. I was the one who tried to buy your property 3 years ago and was outbid. I was disappointed at the time but moved on. I had no idea my mother harbored such resentment over it, and I certainly never encouraged or condoned her behavior toward you. I'm ashamed of what she did. I hope you can accept this apology in the spirit it's intended. I wish you continued success with your properties. I read the email twice. It was thoughtful and seemed genuine. I wrote back, "David, thank you for reaching out. I appreciate the apology, though as you said, you bear no responsibility for your mother's actions. I hope she's getting the help she needs. No hard feelings on my end. Best wishes, Isaac Valdez." It felt good to close that chapter with a small gesture of grace. The following year was one of the best for Valdez Property Solutions. I expanded to 7 properties, hired a second property manager to help Derek, and even started offering property management services to other small landlords in the Tampa area who didn't want to deal with the day-to-day headaches. The Pinewood Heights neighborhood stabilized after Patricia's departure from the HOA. The new board was professional and reasonable. They never bothered me about my signs again, and in fact, we developed a decent working relationship. When they had questions about property maintenance or dealing with difficult residents, Margaret, the new president, would occasionally call me for advice. My signs stayed up on all my buildings, clearly marking them as Valdez Property Solutions properties. They were professional, attractive, and served their purpose, letting tenants and prospective renters know who to contact for questions or applications. One day, about 18 months after the whole ordeal began, I was showing one of my units to a prospective tenant, a young couple relocating to Tampa for work. As we walked to the entrance, the woman pointed at my sign. "Valdez Property Solutions. That's you." "Yes, that's my company. We heard about you from a friend who rents from you in another building. She said you're the best landlord she's ever had. Fair, responsive, actually fixes things when they break." Her husband nodded. "That's why we wanted to see your properties specifically. Hard to find good landlords." I felt a surge of pride. This was why I had fought so hard to keep my signs up, to protect my business reputation, to not let someone's unreasonable vendetta derail what I had built. "I appreciate that," I said. "Let me show you the unit." They signed a lease that afternoon. Looking back on the whole situation, I learned several important lessons. First, when you're in the right, documentation is everything. Every email, every video, every witness statement mattered in proving my case. Second, some people's behavior is about their own issues, not about you. Patricia Hendricks's vendetta was never really about signs or property values. It was about her ego and disappointment that I had bought a property her son wanted. Third, and most importantly, standing up for yourself is worth it. I could have backed down when she first demanded I remove my signs. It would have been easier, less stressful, less expensive in the short term. But I would have been allowing someone to bully me out of my legal rights and potentially harm my business. By standing firm, documenting everything, and pursuing legal remedies when necessary, I protected not just my current properties, but my entire business model. Other landlords in the area heard about how I had handled the situation. Several reached out to ask me to manage their properties specifically because they knew I wouldn't back down from unreasonable demands. My property management signs still hang on all my buildings today. They're clean, professional, and completely legal. When I drive past them, I feel a sense of accomplishment. Not just because I won a legal battle, but because those signs represent something bigger. A business built on integrity, fair dealing, and the courage to stand up for what's right even when someone tries to intimidate you. The tenants in my buildings are happy. The properties are well maintained. My business continues to grow. And Patricia Hendricks is hopefully getting the help she needs to deal with whatever anger and resentment drove her to such destructive behavior. Every now and then, new property owners in the area will ask me about the HOA, nervous about potential conflicts. I always tell them the same thing. Know your rights, keep good documentation, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself when someone overreaches their authority. Most HOAs are reasonable. Most people are reasonable. But when you encounter someone who isn't, having a clear understanding of the law and the willingness to enforce your rights makes all the difference. The whole experience also taught me about the importance of community relationships. After Patricia's resignation, I made an effort to attend a few HOA meetings as a guest, just to show good faith and keep communication open. I wanted the board members to see me as a professional business owner and a good neighbor, not as the enemy Patricia had tried to paint me as. At one meeting, Margaret asked me to give a short presentation about property management and what I looked for in maintaining quality rental properties. I talked about my maintenance schedules, my tenant screening process, and my philosophy of treating rental properties as long-term investments that benefit the whole neighborhood when they are well maintained. Several board members came up to me afterward to thank me. One older gentleman, Frank, shook my hand vigorously. "We should have more landlords like you in this neighborhood. Patricia had us all convinced you were some sort of problem, but you're clearly running a class operation." I appreciate that, Frank. I have as much invested in this neighborhood as anyone. When property values go up, we all benefit. These relationships paid dividends later when I was looking to purchase an 8th property in the area. The seller was hesitant about selling to an investor, worried about the property becoming poorly maintained. Margaret, without me even asking, reached out to the seller and vouched for me and my business practices. I got the property at a fair price, and it's been one of my best performers. Derek, my property manager, often jokes that I should write a book about the whole Patricia Hendricks situation. "Boss, it's like a cautionary tale about HOA overreach. You could call it How I Survived an HOA President's Vendetta." I always laugh it off, but there's truth in what he says. HOA disputes are incredibly common in America, and many property owners don't know their rights or are too intimidated to fight back against aggressive board members who overreach their authority. I've had several other landlords reach out to me over the years with similar stories. HOAs trying to restrict their ability to advertise their properties, demanding control over tenant approvals, or attempting to impose fees and fines that aren't legally authorized. I always give them the same advice. Get a good real estate attorney, understand your property documents, and document everything. One landlord, Maria, called me in tears because her HOA was threatening to place a lien on her property over disputed fines. After I connected her with Marcus, my attorney, we discovered the HOA had been operating without proper legal authority for years. Their governing documents had expired and never been renewed. Maria not only got the fines dismissed, but the entire HOA had to reorganize under proper legal structure. These experiences reinforced my belief that while HOAs can serve important functions in maintaining neighborhood standards and property values, they also attract people who enjoy exercising power over others. When those people become board members or presidents, they can cause tremendous damage before anyone stops them. Patricia Hendricks was an extreme example, but the underlying dynamic is common. Someone with too much time and too little oversight decides to target someone they perceive as an enemy or outsider. If I hadn't had the resources and determination to fight back, She might have succeeded in driving me out of the neighborhood, or at least making my business operations miserable. I'm fortunate that I had Marcus as my attorney, that I had security cameras that captured the vandalism, and that I had the financial resources to pursue legal action. Many property owners don't have those advantages. They cave to unreasonable demands because fighting back seems too expensive or too risky. That's why I now make a point of mentoring newer landlords and property managers in the Tampa area. Derek and I started hosting quarterly meetups at a local coffee shop where small-scale landlords can share experiences, ask questions, and support each other. We've had discussions about everything from dealing with difficult tenants to navigating code enforcement to, yes, handling HOA disputes. At one meetup, a young woman named Sophie told a story remarkably similar to mine. Her HOA was demanding she remove a small lockbox from the front of her duplex, claiming it violated aesthetic standards. The lockbox was for contractors and cleaning services to access the property when she wasn't available. Without it, she'd have to personally be present for every service call or leave keys with people, creating security and liability issues. "Have you checked your property documents?" I asked. "Are you actually subject to HOA jurisdiction?" She blinked. "I just assumed I was. They sent me a letter." "Don't assume. Get your purchase documents and have an attorney review them. You might find out, like I did, that they have no authority over you at all." 2 weeks later, Sophie called me, excited. "Isaac, you were right. My duplex was carved out of the HOA covenant when it was converted from single-family to multi-family. They have no jurisdiction over me." "So what did you do?" I sent them a polite letter with the relevant documents attached, explaining that I wasn't subject to HOA rules, and I CC'd my attorney. They backed off immediately. That's exactly the outcome I hoped for when I started sharing my experiences. Property owners need to know their rights and be willing to assert them. Of course, not every HOA dispute is cut and dried. Sometimes property owners really are in violation of legitimate rules they agreed to. I always emphasize in my mentoring sessions that the first step is understanding what you actually agreed to when you bought the property. If you are subject to HOA rules, you need to follow them or work within the proper channels to change them. What Patricia did to me was illegal harassment and vandalism, which is different from an HOA legitimately enforcing its covenants. The real estate attorney Marcus has become a good friend over the years, and we've worked together on several other cases beyond my own. He's told me that HOA disputes are one of his fastest-growing practice areas, which tells you something about the state of American housing and property rights. "The problem," Marcus explained over lunch one day, "is that HOAs started as a way to maintain property values and neighborhood standards, which is legitimate. But they've evolved into these quasi-governmental organizations with tremendous power but very little oversight. You get the wrong people on a board, and they can make life hell for residents and property owners. Is there any movement to reform HOA laws?" I asked. "Some states are starting to look at it. Florida actually passed some reforms a few years ago that require more financial transparency and limit certain types of fines. But enforcement is still an issue. Who's going to enforce the rules on HOAs? Often, the only recourse is expensive litigation, which most people can't afford. It's a systemic problem, and my situation with Patricia Hendricks was just one example of how wrong things can go. I'm glad I fought back and established clear boundaries, both legally and practically. My business continued to thrive in the years following the dispute. I eventually expanded beyond Tampa into neighboring cities, always being careful about HOA entanglements. When I evaluate potential properties now, one of my first questions is about HOA jurisdiction. If a property is subject to an HOA, I review their rules, their meeting minutes for the past year, and I try to get a sense of whether the board is reasonable or problematic. I've walked away from deals that otherwise looked good because the HOA threw up red flags. Excessive rules, frequent special assessments, evidence of targeting specific owners, or board members with reputations for being difficult. It's not worth the headache, no matter how good the property looks on paper. Derek has become an invaluable partner in the business. After the Patricia situation, he really stepped up, taking on more responsibility and helping me systemize our operations so we could scale efficiently. We now manage 43 units across 11 properties, and we're looking to grow to 60 units by next year. Remember when we just had those 3 buildings in Pinewood Heights? Derek said recently. Feels like a lifetime ago. And one very angry HOA president, I added. Think she ever thinks about what she did? I shrugged. I hope she learned something from it. Anger and vindictiveness don't lead anywhere good. I genuinely mean that. I don't harbor any ongoing resentment toward Patricia Hendricks. What she did was wrong, and she faced consequences for it. But holding on to anger would only hurt me, not her. I've moved on, focused on building my business and serving my tenants well. The neighborhood of Pinewood Heights has changed in the years since the dispute. Property values have continued to rise, driven by Tampa's overall growth and the neighborhood's good schools and convenient location. My properties have appreciated significantly, which has allowed me to refinance and pull out equity to invest in additional properties. Ironically, the very properties Patricia tried to drive me away from have been some of my best investments. The 4-unit building I bought in 2021, the one her son wanted, has nearly doubled in value. The rental income has been steady, and I've had minimal tenant turnover. It's a perfect example of why maintaining good properties and treating tenants fairly is not just ethical but also good business. I still see my property management signs every time I visit my buildings, and they still make me smile. Such a small thing to have caused such a massive conflict, but in the end, those signs represent something important. My right to operate my business according to the law, not according to someone else's unreasonable demands. The legal and practical lessons from this experience have shaped how I approach every aspect of my business now. I maintain meticulous records. I know my rights. I communicate clearly and professionally, but I don't back down when I'm in the right. And I always have good legal counsel available when I need it. Marcus jokes that I'm his favorite client because I actually listen to his advice and document everything properly. Most clients call me after things have already blown up, he says. You call me before problems escalate, and you have all the information I need to help you. That's a lesson I learned from the Patricia situation. Early intervention with proper legal guidance can prevent small issues from becoming major problems. If I had ignored her initial cease and desist letter or tried to handle it without an attorney, things might have gone very differently. The Tampa rental market has been good to me, but it's also become more competitive. Corporate landlords and investment firms are buying up properties, often paying above market value. As a smaller operator, I've had to be strategic about where and how I compete. My reputation, built partly through weathering the Patricia Hendricks storm, has been a key differentiator. Tenants seek out my properties because they know they'll be treated fairly. Sellers sometimes choose my offers over higher bids from corporate buyers because they care about the person who will own their property next. And other property owners trust me to manage their investments because They've seen how I handle adversity. None of that would have been possible if I had backed down when Patricia first came after my signs. Standing up for myself wasn't just about protecting those specific signs. It was about protecting my business reputation and establishing myself as a professional who knows the law and isn't afraid to enforce my rights. I recently spoke at a local real estate investing group about property management best practices. Someone in the audience asked about dealing with HOAs. I told the whole story, from the initial cease and desist to the criminal charges to the eventual resolution. The key takeaway, I told the audience, is know your rights, document everything, and don't be afraid to get legal help when you need it. Also, install good security cameras. They saved me in this situation. Everyone laughed at that last point, but it was true. Without video evidence of Patricia vandalizing my property, the whole situation might have dragged on much longer and been much harder to resolve. After the presentation, several people came up to thank me for sharing the story. One older man, probably in his 60s, shook my hand with tears in his eyes. "I went through something similar 20 years ago," he said. "Except I backed down. I let the HOA bully me into selling my property at a loss. I've regretted it ever since. Thank you for showing that it's possible to fight back and win." That conversation stuck with me. How many people have been bullied out of their legal rights by aggressive HOAs or vindictive board members? How many small businesses have been harmed by people like Patricia Hendricks, who abuse positions of minor authority? I'm just one person with one story, but if sharing my experience helps others stand up for themselves, then something good came out of what was a very stressful and frustrating period of my life. Today, Valdez Property Solutions is thriving. My signs are still up on all my buildings. My tenants are happy. My relationship with the Pinewood Heights HOA is professional and cordial. And Patricia Hendricks is, as far as I know, staying far away from HOA boards and hopefully living a quieter, less vindictive life. Every time I drive through Pinewood Heights and see those signs with my company name, I'm reminded that standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult and expensive, is always worth it. Not just for the immediate outcome, but for everything that comes after. The reputation you build, the respect you earn, and the knowledge that you didn't let someone else's unreasonable behavior control your life or your business. The buildings are still mine. The signs are still up. And Valdez Property Solutions is stronger than ever. That's the ending I fought for, and that's the ending I got.